In today's video, we're going to talk about what you need to get started with sheep. We're going to cover the infrastructure that they need, their feeding requirements, the right breed for you, where to buy your sheep, the predators that you may have in your area, some grooming requirements that sheep have, and general health considerations.
Proper infrastructure is the key to successfully managing any livestock animal. Fencing is the biggest infrastructure requirement. You have to consider, are you going to be doing electric fence that's portable? Are you going to be doing permanent fencing such as cattle panels or permanent electric fence? The smaller and more permanent an area is, the more time that the sheep will have to degrade the structures that you have in place. With respect to electric fencing, make sure that you have the highest output fence that you have available. That means high power energizers and turbo braid wires. We'll make a separate video on electric fencing later.
Sheep are very hardy animals, so their shelter requirements are pretty limited. However, it is important to allow them a space where they can escape particularly harsh elements. It means if you're in a hotter climate or have hot summers, an area where they can get into the shade, and if you have harsh winters or lots of rain or wind, an area where they can escape all of that. A good shelter is also really important when you have lambs because they're younger, smaller, and don't have as developed coats. They're just going to be a little bit more susceptible to harsh elements. 3-walled shelters or even a single wall with a roof are perfectly adequate for sheep. We have a 3-walled shelter with the 4th wall having a large door in it, so it's basically a manger, and this works just fine so that they have protection from wind from just about all sides and protection from any rain or snow. Of course, shelter needs are going to vary depending on your climate and the breed of sheep that you choose.
Sheep are going to drink anywhere from a half gallon to 5 gallons a day. That's a wide range that is going to vary based on a multitude of factors, including your environment, what kind of sheep you have, whether or not your sheep are in milk, all sorts of things. Make sure that your watering system allows lambs to access it to be able to drink. Also make sure that there are measures in place to ensure that your lambs aren't drowning in the water.
Next, you have to consider the feeding requirements of sheep, how you're going to be feeding them, whether or not they're going to be on pasture, or if you're going to be buying all of their hay for them, or if they're going to be fed on grain. Sheep can eat anywhere between 2 to 5% of their body weight per day. This varies depending on the requirements of those sheep, whether or not they're feeding lambs or if they're pregnant. Sheep are the intermediary between cows and goats when it comes to their feed requirements and what they like to eat. Cows are considered true grazers. This means that they eat on just grass alone. Goats are considered true browsers. Sheep eat about 60% grasses and about 40% forbs. Forbs are broader leafed flowering plants. Think of wildflowers and weeds. Oftentimes they are mixed into pastures and you wouldn't even notice. It's also important for sheep to have access to minerals. If they are grazing on pasture, they have less of a need for these because they can get them from the plants that they're grazing. However, if they are only being fed hay or grain, they're going to need a higher mineral. Sheep are also an excellent option if you have a smaller acreage. Typically, the stocking rate per acre is 4 to 7 sheep. This can vary greatly, again, depending on what kind of land you have and how lush your pastures are.
Next, you're going to need to consider which breed of sheep is right for your situation. Some factors that are going to influence this decision are the kind of climate that you're in, what kind of pastures you're going to be on, do you want to be shearing them, things like that. There are 2 kinds of sheep. There are hair sheep and there are wool sheep. Wool sheep will need to be sheared once, maybe twice a year. Hair sheep won't need to be sheared at all. Certain breeds are adapted to certain climates better. For example, the Icelandic sheep are very well adapted to the cold weather, whereas a Dorper sheep is specifically well adapted to dry, hot climates.
Before you buy, you're going to want to consider whether or not you want registered or unregistered sheep. Some of the advantages to registered sheep is that they come with a lineage, so you know who you should or should not be breeding your sheep with to make sure that you're not inbreeding. Registered sheep are also more expensive. This could be a barrier to entry for some. However, if you are going to be breeding and selling the offspring of your sheep, you could potentially make more money on them. Some of the advantages to unregistered sheep are that they are less expensive and they are also more readily available. If you've decided to buy a registered sheep, finding the registry online for that particular breed is super helpful. For Icelandic sheep, it's the Icelandic Sheep Breeders of North America website, and on there there's a registry of people who have their contact information, so you can check and see if they have any sheep available. Even if they don't have sheep available, it's a great way to get your foot in the door and start making connections in the community to find the people who do have sheep available. If you're not looking for registered sheep in particular, Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace are excellent options. You do want to make sure that you are checking on the living conditions of the sheep and asking the right questions. You want to specifically ask and make sure that the animal that they're trying to sell to you is not a cull animal. Cull animals are animals that they are trying to remove from the flock because they're an issue in some way, either bad genetics or they have a bad temperament. The proper management is to slaughter these animals. However, some people don't want to deal with that and would rather pawn them off to an unfortunate customer. You also want to ask if it's a closed flock. This will help determine whether or not there's more or less risk of disease. A closed flock is a flock that doesn't have new sheep being introduced to it on a regular basis. Another thing you want to make sure of is that the sheep that you're buying do not have diseases. Some of these diseases aren't visible upon first notice, and they can be extremely deadly. Certain diseases like CL, CAE, and Iones are not treatable. Iones in particular can stay in the land forever and can continue to infect other animals. It's ideal to purchase sheep that have already been tested negative for these diseases. If that's not an option, however, you can have somebody go out and test them before you purchase them, or you can bring them to your property and keep them quarantined in a particular area and test them on your own time. If you have other livestock, it's especially important to make sure that you're testing for these diseases, because if you brought sheep that had these diseases and you had another animal like goats, you could transfer these diseases to your goats.
One of the biggest killers of sheep flocks is predators. Some obvious predators are bears, mountain lions, wolves, but some things that people don't think about are large birds of prey like eagles and owls. We've had issues with owls picking up full-grown geese. Some of the most common predators are coyotes, especially during lambing, and dogs. You're never going to be able to eliminate the problem of predators. The best thing that you can do is have a layered approach to predator mitigation. This includes things like having the proper fencing system, having a livestock guardian, having deterrents in place like motion-activated lights. High-powered electric fences are going to be a great deterrent because an animal who puts their nose to that is going to rethink their decision. Additionally, a livestock guardian is probably one of the most effective options that you can utilize. One dog may be okay for a few sheep, but the bigger the flock, the more dogs that you're going to want, especially the further away that those sheep are from where you're at. The great thing about livestock guardians is, number one, they can kill coyotes. Number two, they're going to alert you to a problem if there is one. Three, they're a great deterrent and a presence. And four, hopefully they'll buy you enough time that you can get there to handle the situation. Another option that you have is putting them away in a barn at night. For us, that's unrealistic because we don't even have a barn. Co-grazing with larger animals like cows or horses is a good deterrent just because of their sheer size. When it comes to predator management, the more that you can do, the better. A layered security system is the most effective approach.
Sheep also do have some minimum requirements of grooming. If you have a wool sheep, they will need to be sheared once, maybe twice a year. You can do this on your own, or you can hire it out. Their hooves also need to be maintained properly. They do need to be trimmed. The higher quality pastures you have correlates to more hoof trimmings per year, and the less high quality pasture you have in the more rocky areas you have, the less hoof trimmings they're going to need. They also have some issues such as foot rot in the more muddy seasons, so that's also something that you need to be paying close attention to. The general health of your sheep is largely determined by how well you are managing them. It's very important before you get sheep to locate a sheep-specific vet in your area. If you can't find any veterinarians in your area that have experience with sheep, finding one that has experience with goats or other small livestock animals would be just fine. Sheep are, generally speaking, very disease resistant. However, they're not as resistant to parasites and can often have issues with them. One way to mitigate parasites is by intensively rotationally grazing your sheep. We do this because it allows for the pastures to rest in between grazing periods so that the parasites that are in the pastures will die before the sheep regraze that pasture. Another option to help mitigate parasite load is by co-species grazing with animals that don't share the same parasites. Sheep and goats, for example, share the same parasites, so they're not the best option for grazing together. Cows and sheep, or horses and sheep, don't share the same parasites, so they're great options to be co-species grazing. The reason this is effective is because they don't share the same parasites. So if a cow ingests the parasites the sheep have, the parasite's life cycle will end inside of that cow and it will not keep prolificating. This goes both ways. So if the sheep ingested some of the cow's parasites, that parasite's life is going to end inside of the sheep instead of it prolificating. Just like predator management, a multi-layered system is going to be your most effective option. Also, deworming your animals with something such as ivermectin on a regular basis is also an option. We choose to do this as infrequently as possible, but if you do have any particular flare-ups in any particularly deadly parasites, this is something that you definitely want to have on hand.
Before you pull the trigger and decide to get sheep and embark on this endeavor, you want to make sure that sheep are going to meet your needs and wants, but also that you're going to meet the sheep's needs and wants.
If this video was helpful, give it a thumbs up and subscribe. We're going to be doing a lot more content like this. Also, let us know what your favorite breed of sheep is down in the comments.